Hi, I'm James Wiebe, and I've got a fun and important guest here today by the name of Doug Hughes. Doug made history back in 2016 when he landed a gyrocopter in Washington, D.C., and has since been interviewed by a host of important news people like Anderson Cooper. And I'm no Anderson Cooper, but I want to learn from Doug. I want to hear about his experience and his comments on flying and what he did. And so, Doug, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I am 68 years old, retired mailman, felon, and infamous, as you said, for a flight with an ultralight gyrocopter from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to the west lawn of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It was a deliberate flight, planned act. I had 535 letters, one addressed to every member of Congress. I called them out on the issue of political corruption.
Okay, cool. So let's just jump back into that list of questions that we had there. Can you tell me a little bit about how you went about the process of doing flight planning and fuel planning for what was going to be an illegal flight? That's different.
Yeah, when I first started to fly solo, and I had a V-Light airspeed indicator, Christmas tree model, okay? And I also had a handheld GPS that was mounted to a bracket off to my left. I got to where I was flying and I noticed that I had a 45 miles an hour indicated airspeed. And I thought, son of a bitch, I'm going to have to calibrate it. The GPS is going to be more reliable. It says I'm doing 55 ground speed. Okay. And I'm going, it wouldn't bother me if it was a small difference, but I mean, we're talking way 45 versus 55 miles an hour. I flew downrange, came back around, and I went, whoops, I still got 45 mile an hour airspeed. I got 35 miles an hour ground speed. Yeah. Yeah, it's comical to you and to me now, but there was 10 mile an hour wind when I got aloft 500 feet. Hadn't been much on the ground, and I had discounted it. If it was a strong wind on the ground, I wouldn't have flown. Okay, but you get up a few hundred feet, the air can really take off on you. And so I realized early on, and it had to be early on for me to be that stupid. Okay, I realized early on that I couldn't fly into a headwind. Okay, I'd run out of fuel even with what I was planning, an illegal 10-gallon tank. Okay, so when I was doing my flight planning, I came up with two alternate airports. I wanted to take off from an airport in Virginia, which would have been much more convenient, a shorter trailering of the gyro to the airport that I was taking off. And I had cased that individual airport out in advance when I'd gone up to DC to eyeball what I was planning to do. Unfortunately, the wind was from the north, about 10 miles an hour. So
Okay.
I couldn't take off from Virginia flying north into a headwind. I might have made it only to the river, okay? Getting dunked in the river 2 miles short of your destination.
And we would not be having this conversation now.
Yeah. So I also set it up with a 1-week window to fly in because I knew that the weather is almost never going to cooperate. So you couldn't plan something like this in a super light VFR plane and expect that the weather will cooperate. So I had a 1-week window. I got there on day 1. Day 2, it rained. Day 3 was flyable weather, VFR weather, with about a 10,000 foot overcast.
Mm-hmm.
VFR, you don't care about that. But a headwind, if I was going to fly from south to north. So I had to trailer all the way up to Gettysburg, which meant getting up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, because I had to get past Washington, D.C. by 7 o'clock in the morning, because it turns into a huge parking lot from everything coming into Washington, D.C. in the
Completely
morning, and the
agree.
reverse on the way out.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had to get past Washington, D.C. by 7, which meant getting up at 3. And I got to the airport around 10:30. Now, to answer your question, there was a wind and it was blowing the direction it was predicted, but as soon as I took off, okay, I climbed for a little bit of altitude. The gyro was heavier than it had ever been.
Yep.
I had switched from a 5-gallon tank to a 10-gallon tank when I was down in Florida, and I only tested it once for about 5 minutes with a full tank, and it flew fine. But I also had about 20 pounds of mail that
Oh
I
yeah.
hadn't flown with before. And so I was concerned when I took off, and I climbed for altitude, take off into the wind, so I'm flying the wrong direction. I go ahead and climb for altitude, got up to about 500 feet, gently eased into a turn to see if the balance of the plane was still okay. It should have been. Everything was in the center of the plane. So the increased 30 pounds of fuel and the extra 20 or 25 pounds of mail didn't affect the balance of it. But I was very cautious, and I got into the groove, heading due south. And I had just under 45 miles an hour airspeed and 55 miles an hour ground speed.
You were still using my instrument, correct?
Yeah, yeah, still
Cool.
using the,
Okay.
yeah. It was it's really a Christmas tree. At first people from there, we were talking about a series of lights that light up from the
Yeah.
bottom to the top. And at first, when I was trying to use it, it was really inconvenient because I tried to.
For the record, we do not manufacture that model of airspeed indicator anymore. It's a little better than what you were using. So you're traveling. I mean, you're in the gyrocopter. Oh, what kind of engine did you have? I don't think we've mentioned
503.
that. 503, Rotax 503.
Which is,
50 horsepower.
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good push. So it's also a pretty good fuel user. Your burn rate was probably what, 4 to 5 gallons an hour. Yeah. Okay.
Particularly when I was loaded, it would go up to 5. When I was legal, I had just under an hour of flying time.
Okay.
And
So you end up, I mean, you're watching your fuel consumption and so forth as you're on this flight, correct?
no, I didn't have a gas gauge. Okay.
Oh.
My gas gauge was, I turned around and looked back at the.
Well, that's totally fine, but you are doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, and you can eyeball it and do the calculation and see, yeah, we're going to end up with fuel.
The calculation, because the burn rate is pretty constant, and it didn't really, the fuel rate is still constant, even with your being heavy. Okay?
Yeah.
The engine does not care. The throttle setting gives you so many gallons per hour. So I knew I was at 5 gallons per hour. But once I could see that my airspeed was 55, I knew I was there. Okay. If it was 45, which was my cruising speed, I was barely there. Okay.
Now, I've seen a picture of your gyro on the lawn, and I do know that you ended up with a reasonable reserve, but I could also see that if you were going 10 slower, yeah, you'd have been on fumes by the time that you made it on to the ground.
And there was always the question of whether or not I'd be playing aerial chicken with somebody on the way in.
Yeah. Now, I know you've talked about this, about the altitude, but people listening and watching, what altitude were you flying at when you were doing this?
Be light, and I got a bone to pick with you.
Oh no!
I wanted to get a combined altimeter airspeed indicator.
We sell them now,
which you were out of stock on.
Oh,
okay. So I didn't have an altimeter, and
That's
But
the story
I
of
can,
our life, out of stock. Oh no.
yeah,
This is all
I
blue
can.
light radiant stuff behind me.
Oh, the
Sorry.
prosecutor made a big deal of it too. Um, but at a low altitude, I could eyeball it pretty well.
Sure, of course.
My instructor thought as soon as I got over 350 feet of altitude, I was too high. Okay. And I've estimated for that flight, I was at as high as 500 feet. And if I got up to there, I was too high. But that's 500 feet above ground level. But Maryland doesn't have any mountains.
Sure. Did you take time to look around and enjoy the scenery? I mean, I
Oh,
know you
yeah.
talked about the sense of calm that you had. Tell me what you saw. I mean, tell me what you remember from flying into DC in the gyrocopter.
Well, the flight was 2 years in the planning. And it
Yeah.
was a one-shot deal because I released publicity 5 minutes before I took off.
Yes.
And although I didn't specifically say which airport I was leaving from, it was my expectation that the police were going to scramble as soon as it hit the media that I was flying in. I expected them to try to intercept me, and I wasn't sure if they could. An F-18 is going to be flying at 4,500 feet at 450 miles an hour. And I was at 45 miles an hour at 400 feet, so I wasn't sure if anybody would be able to see me, and I didn't know what they were picking up on radar. But I was the most worried that I would be intercepted and arrested while I was still on the ground. Okay. I knew that once I got in the air, I could be shot down, and I was cool. I had accepted that possibility, but I didn't like the idea that I'd be arrested and charged and go to prison, and nobody would ever know what it was for or what
Yeah.
it was about. As long as I took off and I flew with the letters, then the publicity was going to happen because I had released it to the media. And there was a correspondent with the Tampa Bay Times who had the letter. But if I got arrested on the ground, it just never happened. And so I was really tied up in knots. And once my wheels left the ground, I felt fine. Because at that point, it was going to happen. I had accomplished what I set out to do when I took off, not when I landed, because the landing was out of my control and I knew that. But getting off the ground and attempting the stunt, that was in my control if I did it right. And my greatest fear was that I'd be caught on the ground.
Yeah. But please, so you're off the ground, and I realize that this emotional weight of having succeeded in getting off the ground, and now you feel the sense of calm. But tell me that you still had an opportunity to see, the countryside and the city passing below you. In particular, I want to hear what it was like as you got closer and closer to your destination. But the word
Yeah.
is, give us some color as to what
Well,
what you saw, what you experienced.
the thing to remember is I had a 45 mile an hour airspeed. Okay.
Yeah.
And I had taken off from as far away from Washington, D.C. as I calculated I could. So it was about an hour and 20-minute flight.
Yeah.
I had figured it to be an hour and a half flight. And when I took off from Gettysburg, now Gettysburg is still beautiful, but it's a nowhere little town still. Okay. I wouldn't mind living there. Okay. But once I took off, I was just flying out. I was only a few miles away from Little Big Top. Flew south. It's wooded and pastures.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
And then I got into northern Maryland, which from the air looked like it was mostly dairy farms. Beautiful rolling hills, mixture of fields and trees. Always a place to put down if I had to. Okay. Because it was a lot of it was cleared land. And for the first 2/3 of the flight, it was mostly rural. And I was flying in April, so It might have been ugly in the winter. I don't know. I've never flown that area in the winter. But in the spring, it was just gorgeous. Everything had come to life. Green fields, darker shade of green trees, just dotted developed land. But it was developed mostly dairy land from the cows that I saw. Okay. And then about an hour into the flight, it slowly turned more industrial. Okay. You'd see rows of homes. You see a residential area, oftentimes shaded by trees. Okay. But you could tell what it was. And then I got further in, it became larger buildings, more industrial buildings, almost all of them with flat roofs, which I had decided by checking it out on the way in, if somebody took out my engine or if I lost my engine, I wouldn't have tried to put that on a city street or in a parking lot. Okay. A gyrocopter can land intact with no damage any area larger than a tennis court. That's and it has been done in smaller. Okay.
So as you're getting closer, then, I mean, it's turning into city. One of the things that I did when I did a little backstory research is that I saw people had photos and clips of you flying overhead. At some point there, did you begin to realize that, I mean, did you make eye contact with anyone on the ground? Did you see any activity as you were going overhead?
The first contact and activity happened just after I had passed the Lincoln Memorial,
Okay.
which is on the furthest end of the Washington Mall towards the Potomac.
Mhm.
So as I was flying over the Washington Mall and I'm going past the reflecting pool, which is the one on the southern end.
And you're only
Yeah.
about a mile and a half from your touchdown spot. Things are
Right.
happening.
And I had descended. By the way, there is an altimeter for anybody who flies that coast to Washington, D.C. It's called the Washington Monument, which is 555 feet high. So once I got into Washington, D.C., I knew if I was higher or lower than 555 feet.
Of course.
And so I was coming in at 350 or 400 feet and descending. And I went over this construction zone that had been fenced off, and there's a guy with a white hard hat working down below me. And he looks at me and he sees me motoring along at screaming, 40, well, at this point I was doing 35 miles an hour because I had turned. Okay. So I'm going along that way. He looks up at me and waves. Okay. Prosecutor tried to convince the judge there was panic on the ground. Okay. And no, I have yet to see any evidence of panic on the ground. Most people were just, look at that. Okay. They had selected a gyrocopter. It's skeletal. You see the engine, the gas tank, the landing gear, but there's no place for there to be a hidden bomb. And nobody that I saw interpreted me as a threat.
Somebody in a news story said that your landing was not particularly good. True or false?
Let me say that.
And that's all in the context of the emotion of what you were doing. I get it. So
Yeah, no.
talk to me about the landing.
There is some famous video of me landing, and everybody thinks they've seen me land. Okay. There was
I've not seen it.
Yeah, it was the most favorite clip on the news as I was flying past the flags and coming up, just past I climb up, I go over 3rd Street, I go past Grant's statue, which is Grant sitting on a rearing horse, and I was probably head horse high as they came by. And then I go past that statue. The lady is taking a picture on her phone. Okay, so she's getting a pan of me coming by. I get behind the statue. Nobody notices that I disappeared. Now, she come around the statue and she got a picture of me on the lawn in front of the building with the rotor still turning. And everybody goes, we saw him land. Well, you didn't see me land. That actual part was, and there's no other video of landing that I have ever seen, and I've seen everything
Okay.
that there is. Okay, but what happened is Capitol Hill is a hill. It slopes up. Okay, and I had never practiced landing on a slope. Don't intend to. But I knew that the worst thing that could happen is I could come in with a head of steam to an uphill, have my nose dig in, and have it flip.
Ooh,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to come in so that I burned off some airspeed as I burned off some altitude. So I flared about 6 feet high, which is way higher than I would have over a level runway. Okay. I could flare over a level runway, no problem, at a foot. Okay. I might have been able to do it at less than that, but I never wanted to screw it. But I could put my wheels within. But I flared at 6 feet, burned off my speed before I burned off the altitude. Lift disappeared, and I dropped in vertically from 6 feet up and bounced.
Okay.
Literally. Okay. I hit, came back up, came back down again. Okay. It was one of the ugliest landings I've ever done.
Oh.
But nobody saw it. So it didn't happen.
Well, okay. So we're getting out of the flight now, but I think everybody wants to know, and I know once again the news stories are out there. You just landed. What happened next?
Well, I had realized something. I expected to be intercepted on the way in, and
Yeah,
it wasn't.
of course.
Okay. As I get into the last third of the flight, I'm going, what's going on? The media did know that I was coming in. There was testimony in Congress 2 weeks after my flight, the Oversight Committee, that TV executives were reportedly watching me fly in live because I was streaming the flight in New York City. Okay, and the chair of the committee was talking to all the security people, NORAD, FAA, U.S. Secret Service, and he said, "What the hell is it with social media? You people don't know what's going on." Okay, he was really unhappy. But yeah, the media knew, but the police didn't, and the media didn't break the story until after I landed. They were watching it, but they didn't break the story, and they acted like it was breaking news at the moment I landed. Okay. The problem is the police never did get the word. Okay. I expected that when the media knew that it was real, it was going to break as a story in progress. Okay. It didn't break as a story in progress. It broke as a story after I landed, and the police had no idea that I was coming. That had not been part of my plan. I wanted them to know I was coming because I wanted them to know I was nonviolent. Okay. As I was flying the Capitol Mall, not having been intercepted in the air, I thought, okay, what they're going to do is they're going to apprehend me on the ground. Good, that's better than being shot down in an air-to-air dogfight, since I didn't have a pea shooter. If they were going to apprehend me on the ground, there would have been about every 50 yards an SUV, black and white, okay, and cops out there. And I thought they might, and I didn't like it, but they might have even tried to evacuate the mall. Nothing. It was all normal. I'm flying over tourists. I'm flying over construction people, okay, and everything is normal. And I realized I'm going to land, and the cops who apprehend me are not going to know what's going on, and they're not going to know that I'm nonviolent.
Yeah, but
I decided it was a good idea to smile.
okay. So you landed, you got out of the gyrocopter. How long before? Yeah.
No, I
what
didn't
happened?
If you've been stopped by cops, as we all have, if you think that, wait, this guy might be a little bit nervous about this stop, you don't get out of the car and you don't do anything where your hands are out of view. Okay. I did the equivalent of you being stopped and you have the feeling it's a felony stop and you have no idea why. Okay. Felony stop, like 2 or 3 cops suddenly converge on it and you're going, whoa, this isn't a traffic stop. My hands were in view and I stayed right where I was. Okay. The police fortunately waited till the rotors stopped turning because I don't want people not familiar with the aircraft around the engine was off, but the overhead blades spin on momentum for about a minute. But they waited that out. As soon as they stopped, they converged from the left and the right. And they said, get out of the aircraft. And I said, well, I've got a couple of phones in my pocket. I've got to take them out. I had planned on having a phone conversation on the way in with the news reporter, but it didn't work out that way. But I had wires going into my coat pocket and
Oh,
two phones there. And so I went, no, I'm not going to reach into a pocket where the cops see wires. Okay. I said, I've got two phones. I've got to take them out. Okay. It's all right. Do it. So I gingerly reached in and I set them down. I said, okay, get out. I said, well, I got to undo my seatbelt. And they said, okay, do it. Oh, fine. With one hand so they can see what's going on. I undo the seatbelt and lay it up out of the way. I said, okay, get out of the aircraft. I said, okay, I got to kick my leg over the stick. And at this point, they realized I'm not going to do anything unexpected. Okay. And so I got out of the aircraft and almost reflexively, I go into my pocket for a tether to tie the overhead blades. You tether one of the overhead blades to the frame of the aircraft so that they can't spin. So as soon as I landed, I went to go ahead and do that. And they said, put it down. And I got just a rope in my cord. And I said, no, I got to tether the overhead blades. And the guy says, put it down. I realized he was about to go for his gun.
mm-hmm.
I dropped it. And, they're gonna go ahead and cordon off the area. The only people on the inside will be cops, and I hope they got helmets.
Okay. Well, that's the flight. The big question, I know you've already that we discussed this on a prior call, but the flight was, the hard word was the flight was illegal. So how succinctly give me your summary as to why you feel it was the correct thing for you to do at that point in time.
I don't think many pilots will disagree with me. Safety outweighs the law. Okay. If there is a significant difference in whether or not you will live or whether you will die, you break the law and you argue about the law when you're alive on the ground.
So yeah, go on, please.
I flew from as far away from DC as I could carry in weight.
Mm-hmm.
I did that to give the authorities the maximum amount of time because I'd been interviewed by the U.S. Secret Service to establish that I was nonviolent. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If they established as a fact that I was nonviolent, which I had established with the media, I showed them the business card of the U.S. Secret Service agent who interviewed me twice. Okay. I said, they know that I'm nonviolent, but I had to give them time to look up who I was. And then I was hoping, betting my life, that if they knew I was nonviolent, they could not shoot me down.
Okay.
Okay. If it was going to come out later on that they made the decision to shoot me down after they had established that I was nonviolent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Given them that window of time, I could have flown from less than an hour, okay, away on a 5-gallon tank.
Sure.
45 minutes, say.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The problem with that is it didn't give them the maximum amount of time, and that's what I was hanging my life on. That's what I was betting on, is that the authorities would not kill me if they knew I was nonviolent.
Oh, sure.
So I made the decision. The Part 103, it's 254 pounds, 5-gallon tank, and I went to a 10-gallon tank. And then there were some peddling requirements about airspeed, and it has to be single place. But I deliberately broke that because the FAA can levy fines against you for that violation. Okay? But nobody under Part 103 gets into any serious legal trouble other than the fact that the FAA can lay a fine on them, depending on how flagrant the violation is, if they ramp check them.
Yeah. Did I know that? I know that you spent 4 months in prison, and but I'm pretty sure that time in prison wasn't because of an FAR Part 103. Did the FAA separately ever try to fine you or do anything to you related to that particular?
They must have had a team working for a month to try and come up with everything that I had violated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sure.
They had
But did they?
a 12-page letter, about 6 or 8 pages of them listed all of the violations, and they wanted I forget what it was, $12,000 in fines.
Okay. Yeah.
And I handed that off to not my public defender. I had another lawyer who was able to negotiate it, and he negotiated it down to $0
Okay.
after a few weeks of negotiation.
Was that
So
because you were going to get prison time and that was part of a greater negotiation, or what do you think the angle was there?
the angle there was that the criminal thing was proceeding so that they were going to get the gyrocopter and they were going to get jail time.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The FAA, I think, did not want me to get the gyrocopter back.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if I didn't get the gyrocopter back and I got jail time, then there, but I wasn't blacklisted. A few months later, I applied for, and when I got out of prison, I had my my license, my student license.
Yeah.
So I was not blacklisted. Uh, but yeah, the FAA was ticked off.
Oh, I'm sure they were. And I know that you wrote a book about this experience. What's your website?
The website is, I spent weeks thinking about this. DougHughesAuthor.com.
DougHughes author.com, correct?
Right.
And
Doug Hughes, yeah. And
yeah.
I go by Doug more than Douglas, but for some reason I get put up on the screen as Douglas.
And I went there and I read the excerpt from your book that you have posted there, and I found it compelling. So I'm going to post that at the end of this talk. A couple of other questions. What are your plans moving forward? I saw something about a red gyrocopter out there, and I want to hear about that.
Yeah. For those who follow gyrocopters, it's a little wing, which is one of only a couple of tractor gyrocopters.
Uh-huh.
This little wing is basically a scaled down J3, okay, without wings. It's about 600 pounds, which is 3 times what the ultralight that I flew was. And I want to do a tour of the lower 48 states to every state capital, starting near Washington, D.C., starting with Virginia, to finish up in Washington, D.C., 4 months and 10,000 miles later. And I wanted to stick mostly with flying, but the idea is simple. And everybody I've talked to who flies gets it. All right. Big money is ruling Congress, and Congress is writing legislation that benefits the big players. Okay. So Washington, D.C. has become a fully owned subsidiary of Wall Street. Okay. That ends overnight if we can erect a wall of separation between big money and our government. And there are about half a dozen very credible groups that I got to know the leadership of that I mentioned at the end of the book. Okay. So I'm not out to do anything myself except promote the idea that we have the power to get big money out of politics, and everything will change after that.
Okay, and the obvious question for that is, in this one, you're staying within the dotted lines for flight rules and qualifications and so forth?
Trust me.
Okay.
The FAA will come down on me hard if I go.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to be much more careful. I have to expect that I will be under a microscope. I still get ramp checked by the U.S. Secret Service and the Washington, D.C. police. 2 years ago, they sent a couple of cops from Washington, D.C.
Why?
Because they heard I had a red plane.
Huh. Okay.
So, and they're real friendly. I get along fine with them. I'm not hostile to the police doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be looking out for Washington, D.C. They're supposed to make sure that nothing violent can or will happen. And I'm nonviolent, and I emphasize that with the police I have from the earliest days. But the fact that I'm nonviolent doesn't mean that I don't expect them to check. They do, they are. I don't think they're watching my phone calls or my emails, but they said, Doug, when the flight starts, give us a call.
Well, I can see why they would want to do that. Okay, I think we're going to wrap things up here. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm looking forward to if anyone comments. I'd love to hear what people have to say. I wanted to give the name of your website one more time. Go ahead, Doug. Why don't you say that?
Okay. Yeah, it's DougHughesAuthor.com. You can get the book on Amazon. The book is titled Flight Plan. But if you go to Amazon and go to books, you could search for it by title or author.
And I've enjoyed hearing your story as well. I am James Wiebe, and thank you, Doug, for being my first official my first official interviewee for my podcast. I appreciate that very much.
Thanks for having me, James.
Thank you.